Hello. Today we're in Union Cemetery of Cedar Mills. Alternative names include Cedar Mills, Old Community, Old Union, Union Schoolhouse. It's located in Washington County, Oak Hills, Beaverton city area in the great state of Oregon. There's about 500 to 2,000 deep sixes. For you city folks, it just means a grave, burial site. There's over 1,000 memorials. So let's go visit the local residents and hear their story. A little history behind Union Cemetery. Established burials were believed to begin sometime in 1856, 1858. Historians think it started before that, but they're not really sure. They did decide eventually that they needed a site for a cemetery, a common school, and Orthodox churches. So around 1857, land was donated for that. In 1878, there was about 3.8 acres available for that use. To give you an idea, today's average cemetery is about 4,000 acres. So I think that explains and shows just how much our human population has exploded. School directors managed the cemetery until 1903, and that's mainly because state law came into effect. So they renamed it Union Schoolhouse Cemetery. This is primarily because the schoolhouse and the cemetery were on the same grounds, and often that tended to be a community meeting place for the city and the local townspeople. In 1949, it was named the Union Cemetery of Cedar Mills. Became 4.63 acres as the Union School closed. Those vacant grounds became burial grounds. It should be noted that the Union School was the first public school in Cedar Mills. The Cedar Mills Garden Club has provided maintenance on the grounds on a volunteer basis ever since. Actually turned out to be quite a gorgeous day. A little rainy yesterday here in Oregon, go figure. It's about 40 degrees this morning on March. Beautiful Friday. There's a few names of importance in this cemetery. Finleys, Youngs, Bartons, Lays, Solers, Saltzmans, Reeves are just a few pioneers. We'll be looking at 4 of them in particularly. I'd like to first discuss the Young family. Mainly Elim Young we'll start off with. He was the father, Irene being the mother. Elim was born in New York. He was a millwrighter and married to Irene. They moved here from Ohio to Oregon in 1847. And that was because the rumor was Oregon was the land of apples and rain. There was a lot of buzz during this time, hence we have the Oregon Trail as well. It was a very long trip during this time, often many months. In the 1800s, rate of travel was pretty slow compared to today. I think I saw an example was it took about 4 weeks to get from the west coast of Oregon to North Dakota, to give you an idea. And during this time, Oregon didn't become a state until 1859. So you can imagine the challenges involved. They stopped in Walla Walla, Washington during their travel, were offered shelter by the famous Dr. Marcus Whitman at his mission. And if you haven't heard of Dr. Whitman, I recommend you hit the pause button now and look up the Whitman Massacre. Get familiar with that. So Young, with her children, decided to stay and help. Considering their supplies were very low at this time, this would kind of turn out to be a bad decision, would backfire. A little bit about Dr. Whitman. His goal was to provide the good word to the local Cayuse tribe in the area. Basically convert them to Christianity. Also during this time there was an outbreak of measles, and Dr. Whitman was actually trying to help and treat them. However, the Cayuse tribe accused Whitman of murdering, noticing that more whites lived than their tribespeople. They accused him of administering poison and was a failed shaman. You have to understand, with Native Americans, the shaman has a lot of accountability as far as success and failure. Weeks later, the Whitman Massacre took place. 13 people were killed, including Dr. Whitman and his wife, by the Cayuse tribe. The Cayuse tribe held the Young family prisoner among 50 other settlers until the Hudson Bay Company paid ransom for them. On December 31st, they reached Fort Walla Walla. after being freed. They got the hell out of there the next morning. They got on boats headed for Fort Vancouver, which must have been lovely because it was midwinter and they were traveling down the Columbia in open boats, little clothing, and personal belongings. Fortunately, in 1848, they owned a house and land. The sons Daniel and John continued to work to support the family. Unfortunately, only living in his new home for 8 years, Elam died at the age of 66 years old. His wife, Irene, went on to live with their son, John Quincy Adams Young. She passed away in 1865 at the age of 74. And here is John Quincy Adams Young, Elam's son. He married his neighbor, Elizabeth Constable. They settled together in 1862 and built a log cabin. John was a pretty successful guy. He formed a business partnership with William Everson to buy a Jones Lumber Company. In 1869, historians believe this is when the famous Saltbox home known as John Quincy Adams Young House was built, if you're familiar with this area. He sold his interest in the company and built a bigger house in 1874. Unfortunately, apartments now occupy that space as it no longer exists. In 1874, he petitioned for a post office proposing the name Cedar Mills in the area, naming it after cedar trees and the mill in the area. Makes sense. He was granted the name and appointed the first postmaster for this area. He lived a pretty eventful life and was big into the community. As you can see, he died in 1905 at the age of 76 years old. His wife buried with him. Next to him, I guess you could say. His wife died in 1934 at 93 years old. That Saltbox House that was built in 1869 is the oldest remaining structure in Cedar Mill. It also hosts the annual Cedar Mill Cider Festival, if you're interested, which is held in the fall, obviously. Just thought I'd stop by the John Quincy Adams house. I believe it's the John Quincy Adams house. There's no signage indicating what it is. It's just a boarded up house right now. This is the one I mentioned that was built in 1869, a Saltbox House. Doesn't look like it's in, I don't know what the word would be right here. But for being such a historical site, it's just odd, I guess would be the word. It's a nice little location though, next to a little stream in the back. Like I said, I wish I could show you some signage, but nothing around. Just a house. You wouldn't even know what it was if you were walking by. Right here we have George Hall Reeves and his wife, Mary E. George was born in Illinois, then moved to Missouri in 1843, and then moved to Oregon in 1852. Probably was a guy who just couldn't sit still and wanted adventures, maybe loved new places. In 1855 and 1856, he served in the Oregon Mounted Volunteers during the Yakima Indian War. Over here is Mary Reeves. He married her in 1865, and she is the sister of Lawrence Hall, actually, considered the first settler of Beaverton. They had 9 children together, but only 4 made it past 20. You can see here the birth and date are unknown on the tombstone. I don't know why, but I did find an obituary online that says pioneer of 1851 dies at the age of 80 years old in 1915. His wife died in 1935 at 85 years old. Took me a while, but I found Sarah Jane Finley and Alexander Finley. Alexander was born in Indiana in 1838 and crossed the plains at the age of 9. He did settle in Vancouver, Washington on his way, witnessing the execution of the Indians. Remember the Whitman massacre. This was a time when violent Indian warfare was going on. He married Sarah Jane Reeves, Sarah Jane Finley we have here. In 1863, they moved to Union County, and they were the first to take up residence in the Walla Walla Valley. Hope I'm saying that right. This was a center of hostility, primarily due to the Bannock Indians. In 1872, they began to farm in the Lostine Walla Walla Valley area. Sarah was believed to be the first white woman in this vicinity. Raids from Chief Joseph were pretty common in this area. So therefore in 1898, Alexander sold his farm and they moved to Washington County and made a home in Cedar Mills. They had 9 children together. Alexander died in 1912 at the age of 73 years old. You can see here they have the cool little Pioneer of Oregon guy on there with the wagon. And the same with Sarah, who died in 1922 at the age of 79. It took me a while to find this one because I was expecting several graves. Turns out it's one of many on one tombstone, as you can see. This would be the Barton family, Edward Barton and Hannah Barton, pictured here in the front of the tombstone. This family suffered great losses, had a lot of tragedy. Edward was a wagon maker in Indiana for the Ripley Company in 1850. In 1851, he decided to move him and his family to Oregon. A journey, I believe, that lasted about 5 months, I think I read. Keep in mind, this is the 1800s, travel was slow. When Edward arrived in Oregon, he continued to build wagons to support his family. The mother, Hannah, died in 1863. Edward would go on to remarry a woman named Abigail and move to Portland. Now, I believe they had 9 children from what I've read. 7 of the children came along to Oregon. However, this is kind of when tragedy struck. They had 7 children here: Joshua, Ruth, Mary, Lady, Tisra, Owen, William, and Simone. Apologies if I'm saying those wrong, any of those. The son Joshua died at the age of 16 years old in 1865. The daughter Ruth died in 1857 at 13 years old. Mary Lady died in 1893 at 51 years old. Apologies. She married William B. Clark and had 6 kids. However, only 2 lived to adulthood. Mary is buried in Washington County at Stony Point Cemetery. Tirzah died in 1903 at 70 years old. She had a pretty good run. She was married to James Harvey McMillian. They had 7 children together. Only 4 made it to adulthood. Tirzah is buried in Lone Fir Cemetery in Portland. William, one of the other sons, died in 1883 at 52 years old. He didn't stay with the family, however. He continued on to Douglas County during their move to Oregon. He's pretty successful. He took a claim at Cow Creek in 1855. William eventually owned 37 pieces of land property in Douglas County. He married Anne Rebecca Smith, and they had 6 kids together. The family is buried at the Barton Family Cemetery, which apparently is the oldest known cemetery in the Glendale area. However, I was trying to find pictures online, doing a little research on it, trying to find a location. It's referred to the Cedar Ranch now, and from my understanding, the cemetery is no longer visible. Another son named Owen Fishback was a carpenter. He died in 1922 at the age of 84. He married and had 2 daughters. I couldn't find any information on the wife's name, though. Unfortunately, his wife died after the birth of their 2nd daughter. Owen, however, never remarried, raised his 2 daughters on his own, and he's buried at Mount Hope Cemetery in Baker City, Oregon. The final son, Simone Charles, was a farmer his whole life, and he died in 1943 at the age of 93 years old. He was married to Claire Elizabeth Sullivan and had 2 children. Unfortunately, one died during infancy. He did spend his retirement on his farm Oswego, and he's buried at Riverview Cemetery in Portland. Just wanted to go back. I noticed something compared to my notes that was on the tombstone. I did say the son Joshua died at 16 years old in 1865, but however on the tombstone, correction, it says 1856. Just wanted to clarify that. So that was a mini tour of Union Cemetery, a bit about the stories and the pioneers. Hope you enjoyed it. If you have any recommendations on other small, older cemeteries to visit in the Portland area, leave a comment. Also, apologies, I sound a bit muffled. I am wearing a mask because there is someone else in the cemetery, and I like to be respectful to them. I don't think the dead mind, though, if I have a mask on. Thanks for watching, and have a great day.